So when you were breaking down, because you're dealing with, if you go back to the 1880s all the way to now, you're dealing with, 140 years of content. What was your process like to refine that to get the most important bits of information throughout that history? Like, did you start and you're like, okay, we know we have to get the beginning of like how wrestling became famous, but we have to also hit the big names and we have to hit the big things that resonated with a lot of people as kids. And like, did you talk to people from other generations? Did you just kind of do online research? Like,
so coming into this, the editor on the book, Patrick Barb, he reached out to me because he was a fan of my wrestling podcast called Straight Shoot. I did it for 4 years, at least one episode a week, and we started off as kind of a Raw review show. We'd go live immediately after Raw, and we'd have on wrestlers and comedians, writers, musicians, anybody who's a wrestling fan who I thought might be able to get us more views. was who I booked on the show, right? But it was great because I developed a relationship and with a lot of amazing wrestlers, people like Roderick Strong and Tommaso Ciampa, Adam Cole, Shayna Baszler, all these big names that are now killing it in NXT. Chris Hero as well. And in doing that, I was able to learn an immense amount about wrestling just through the act of talking with these people about the art form. Also, as an avid wrestling fan for so many years, I've spent a ton of time and energy reading books about wrestling. So I had a lot of the base research already done, So Patrick came to me because at 10 Speed Press, who's our publisher, they're doing a line of books called The Comic Book Story Of. They had done beer, they had done video games. Patrick's a big wrestling fan. He listened to my wrestling podcast. He knew that they needed to do one about professional wrestling, that the time was right for it. And he had the bright idea to, if you're going to do a big comic book about professional wrestling, maybe hire the guy who's a comic book writer and has a wrestling podcast.
It's just obvious.
It makes sense, right? So he came to me, and fortunately, I had enough of kind of the preliminary research just up in my brain from years worth of reading wrestling autobiographies and nonfiction books and watching wrestling and watching documentaries and all this stuff. I had the base outline. I knew enough to sit down and do the outline and even do page breakdowns to figure out, what's going to be on every single one of these 170 pages. Once that was done, I was able to kind of focus in on where I needed more information and areas that, maybe so for instance, I have a real fondness for professional wrestling in American wrestling in the late territory days. So I'm talking like the 1970s, like up into the 80s, right? That's my favorite era. It predates me. I'm not that old, but I like going back and watching that stuff, and I love reading about it. So that I knew backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
But when it came to getting the specific, and I watch Lucha Libre currently, and I watch Japanese wrestling, and there isn't as much British wrestling to watch, but I even watch some of the British wrestling promotions that have cropped up, but I wasn't as familiar with the history, and so I did have to go digging with, Wikipedia, of course, is a great starting point, but it's not sufficient,
Yeah,
so I would raid Wikipedia for the bibliographies, which I think is, I don't know, like if ever you're working on a nonfiction thing, like Wikipedia is incredible. Like, people talk bad about using Wikipedia as a source, and using Wikipedia as a primary source, lousy. Using Wikipedia to borrow their the bibliographies and the
Genius.
reference, perfect.
I love it.
Yeah, that's like, this isn't. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm giving away secrets or anything. This is just how research works, and people have forgotten that this is how you actually research stuff. So I had to go back and dig to fill in kind of the blanks and figure out what these missing pieces were. But all along, the goal, I came into this thing and I had I looked at them like thesis statements, right? And it's kind of like a clinical way to look at building a story. But for a nonfiction project, I think it makes sense, right? I came in with a few overarching ideas. One of which was that wrestling has always been wrestling, and that, there's a lot of times there's this narrative that, oh, well, wrestling changed at this point, or, this is when people stopped believing that it was real, or, this is when kayfabe died, or whatever. And, like, people love arguing and going back and forth about this stuff. My thesis is that all of it's nonsense. Wrestling's always been wrestling. Going back to the 1880s, the stuff was scripted, and if not scripted, fixed, right? And designed to get an emotional reaction from people. And that's never changed. That was one of the theses. And the other one was this idea of shifting goalposts and blurring the lines between fact and fiction, and constantly moving and like sticking and moving to keep the audience guessing. So even when they think they know what's going on, they don't really, and by saying, yeah, this stuff is fake, but this is real, and the way that constantly changes and kind of ebbs and flows over time throughout wrestling history. And so those were kind of my two overarching theses. And there are a lot of other ones. There are a lot of like recurring themes and thematic stuff that we tried to bring back and hit on, especially as, there were some wrestlers that appeared over and over and over again as I was just naturally telling the story, which was really helpful in terms of giving us a through line throughout the entire thing. But yeah, that was my guiding light. And one of the toughest things, I mentioned already, but one of the toughest things about this book was figuring out what to leave on the cutting room floor. Because there's a lot. There's a lot of stuff that I could do like 5 more volumes of these, right? Because there's just so much. And I wanted to get as in-depth as I could. But the fact of the matter is, we only had 170 pages, and some stuff did get cut. And so I've started to get it a little bit already. But I've been bracing myself for months for all of like the angry, like, how could you leave out this guy? Or how could you leave out this promotion or this event? And the answer, whenever somebody asks me that, the answer is, it's not that they're not important. It's not that I don't love them. Some of my favorite wrestlers I didn't really get into here. Yeah. It's that we were trying to tell a story. And as important or cool or awesome as whatever wrestler, promotion, or event or occurrence might be, if it didn't tie into this overarching story, we cut it. Yeah, it didn't make the cut. It
doesn't work in the narrative. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the big thing. And the reason we did that so it would hold together as one piece, right? That would hold together like a story. But we also did that for something that you mentioned as well. Like, you're not a professional wrestling fan. You're not a dyed-in-the-wool wrestling fan. And we wanted to make sure that, while hardcore fans are going to love this thing, they're going to see the shots that my co-creator on this, Chris Moreno, he did an amazing job.
He blew it away. He did such an amazing job.
Yeah,
I mean, you can see it just even on the cover and every single page, there's so much detail. You look at like just some of these Japanese wrestlers,
especially once you get into like specific moments. Like there's a really great shot of Lex Luger showing up at the very first Monday Night Nitro.
Yeah,
it was a surprise, and it's this iconic, like kind of like slightly worm's eye view shot of him in the Mall of America wearing this like weird Nehru collar shirt. And Chris is such a good caricaturist, and he's so good with period stuff that he's able to take iconic moments like that and recreate them in a way that is evocative and makes you feel like that moment without it ever being like a light box, like really like obvious photo reference thing. And so there's a ton of stuff like that for hardcore wrestling fans. So they're going to see it and they're like, oh, I remember that. And like and it's going to give you the same feeling that you felt when you're seeing the stuff originally. But just as important as that, and that is important. I wanted this to be a definitive work on wrestling. But not just for the hardcores. I wanted it to be definitive for new fans and lapsed fans. And if you are a diehard wrestling fan and you have a friend who's like, what is this all about? Like I don't get it. It's just so much, and it can be overwhelming. Just like comics, it can be a little overwhelming if just to try and dip your toe into it. Yeah, I want this to be a book that you can hand to somebody and they can read and they go,
I'm in.
They get it. And even if they don't love wrestling, if you don't like wrestling, you don't like wrestling. Exactly. You'll understand why people do love it, and you'll have enough base knowledge to move forward. Yeah. Whether it's watching mainline WWE stuff, whether it's getting into some Lucha Libre or some Puroresu or, British promotions or indies or whatever it is, like we cover it all in here. And I hope that it gives people the confidence and the knowledge base to hone in on what exactly they like and pursue that and become big wrestling fans if they want to.
Yeah. Or big comic book fans and wrestling fans.
Yeah,
you can do both of this.
Yeah, man.
It's so cool. I love it. That's super exciting.